chapter 14, as we look up here on the, or you have the handout in front of you, they've made some changes in the way they classify a few things. In the beginning of this chapter, in the old book, they had these chapters identified as acoelomate animals, pseudo-coelomate animals, coelomate animals. I mean, they're using all these different crazy terms, and they kind of went away from that a little bit. They do define the terms coelomate and acoelomate, and coelomate says it has a gut surrounded by a mesodermal mass that houses a fluid-filled coelom. Well, a coelom is a cavity. It's just simply a cavity. And an acoelomate animal does not have a coelom, by definition. By definition. So they start with that, and they're trying to explain on the first couple pages why they've done this and why they've done that, and I read some of that and thought, I think I'll just move on, because I don't know that it's pertinent to us. Most of the animals we're going to talk about from here on out, with a few exceptions. They talk about some diploblastic animals, but most everything we're going to talk about from here on out are triploblastic, meaning they have three germ layers: an ectoderm, an endoderm, and a mesoderm. And that's on your paper there. The first phylum they talk about is one of those they've twisted around a little bit. I don't have any test questions over it, but I kind of identified a few things for you. Phylum Acelomorpha, and flatworms, ribbonworms, roundworms, and segmented worms. It's kind of a big phylum that covers even worms we're going to see in a later chapter. All these tend to be monoecious. In other words, they're hermaphroditic. They reproduce by themselves. They live in marine sediments or brackish water. Brackish water is where fresh water and salt water combine. That's where they're going to live. Most are free living. In other words, they're not going to cause a lot of problems. They're just out there doing their own thing. And everything here used to be shoved into class Turbellaria within phylum Platyhelminthes. So they've separated these out just a little bit because they see a few differences in here. But we're going to start really where our notes pick up today is going to be in phylum Platyhelminthes, the flatworms. And I made a few just general characteristic listings here. They are free living. There are some that are free living, put it that way. There are some that are parasitic flukes, and then some fit the tapeworm category. They run from anywhere from 1 millimeter to 1 meter in length. Most are 1 to 3 centimeters in length, so variation in sizes. Excretion and osmoregulation are flame cells. Let me give you an idea what a flame cell is. A flame cell is a very small component of a metanephridia. A metanephridia is a small component of a nephridium, which is a small component of a nephron, which is only 1 of a million that we have per kidney. That's about as small as it gets, isn't it? To still be a functional component that they call a kidney. But these are invertebrates. They're very small. Most of these we're going to be talking about in the next couple of chapters are somewhat parasitic to an extent, and a lot of them are seriously parasitic. And some of them don't even have a digestive system because they're consuming or absorbing food sources that are already digested by their host, see? And so all they do is absorb the food nutrients already digested, and we'll see in a couple of these, 80% of their body and energy goes toward reproduction. These are some reproducing machines. These endoparasites are some reproducing machines. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. So the flame cell is an itty-bitty kidney. That's a simplified version of what we can say. A sense organ, they have light-sensitive eye spots. Oceli, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I've never seen an actual pronunciation written out in a book, so your guess is as good as mine. Reproduction, mostly by fission. We said back earlier, when in doubt, just put binary fission. It's a good guess even on these animals. But they have noticed sexual reproduction in these organisms when their life feels threatened. When the species feels threatened, they'll go into sexual reproduction. There's four major classes I want to look at. The first class is monogenae. Now that's not the same order as in the book, but I kind of picked this one first simply because there's not just a whole lot going on with this class. These tend to be ectoparasites, and they find them anywhere from the bladder of frogs to the living on the eyes of hippopotamus. So not a big deal class as far as we're concerned. The second class is Trematoda. Now these parasitic flukes can become a concern. They are endoparasite. They are leaf-like in form. Suckers and hooks for adhesion with increased reproduction. All these are going to just massively reproduce. We get into a subclass of Trematoda. These are the ones that really break down into serious stuff. The first subclass of Trematoda is Digenae. Digenae has an intermediate host of a mollusk, and 99% of the time it's going to be a snail. And you will have a test question on intermediate host and definitive host. And if it does not find that snail, its life cycle is severed. It's got to find that mollusk or that snail. Some of them are consumed by the snail and then go through the snail and then go to the next stage, leave the snail and enter the water. Some of them actually just find the snail and use it as the intermediate host. But keep in mind the snail is the most common mollusk that's used as an intermediate host. The definitive host here would be a vertebrate. In some cases we're going to see it may just be a fish. In other cases it's another mammal that's standing in the water or has entered the water, and these now developed Digenae actually burrow through the skin. In the fish, they'll burrow underneath the scales, but in larger animals, they'll burrow through the skin, enter the system, and then just take off and go where they want to go. So, now, the digenins inhabit digestive tracts, respiratory tracts, circulatory tracts, urinary and reproductive tracts. It doesn't matter. It's just wherever they want to go, they wreak some havoc. So, these are not to be overlooked. All right, under the digenins, we're going to see some liver flukes. Now, liver flukes in humans, common in Asia, China, and Japan, and they even say in the book, I think Southeast Asia. Asia is Asia, if you ask me. I mean, wherever they eat raw fish, that's where you're going to get this. So raw fish is a big thing. It says cats, dogs, and pigs are often infected, but liver flukes in humans basically is going to come from eating raw fish. And it tells you on the next page. The structure of these liver flukes have oral and ventral suckers. 80% of the body is devoted to reproduction. 80% of the body is devoted to reproduction. When we dissect this week in lab, we will dissect worms, 2 different kinds of worms. And one of them, I hope we get to that chapter today, I think we will, is the Ascaris lumbricoid, which is the common roundworm of dogs or even us. And the other one is just an earthworm. We'll see the comparison. But what we'll see in that little roundworm is basically nothing but reproductive system. I mean, you cut it open and say, what's there? A reproductive system. Well, where's the intestine? Well, we got to look real hard. We'll find a part of the intestine, but it's basically reproduction. That's all they're made for. They're already eating already digested food, right? They're living off their host. Okay? So here's kind of the life cycle. And a lot of life cycles hang real close to this life cycle. These liver flukes tend to live in the bile duct or in the bile passageways of humans. The myristidium, which is a form, it's like when we go from zygote to embryo to as we build up, the myristidium is the next step up. Urinated into water, hatch after being consumed by a snail. So the snail actually eats these as food, not knowing that it's not going to really, these are just going to live through the digestive system and come right back out. When they go into the next stage, it's almost like insects, they metamorphose into a next stage. The Caesaria then escape the snail and burrow under the scale of a fish, which may be consumed by another mammal, raw. Lifespan of these can be 15 to 30 years. So, again, eating the raw fish. Whatever mammal, if it's a bear that eats the raw fish, then that's what's going to happen. Another schistosoma or blood fluke fits under this category. There's 200 million people infected. Africa, South America, West Indies, Middle and Far East. The life cycle, almost identical to the liver fluke, except blood flukes like to burrow through the human skin. They won't necessarily just attach underneath the scale of a fish. Fish is not really what they're looking for. Blood flukes want something bigger and better. Not cold-blooded, but warm-blooded animals. And so if you're out swimming in this stream or lake and there's blood flukes out there, then they'll burrow through your skin, and from that they'll go wherever they want to go. Ill effects that they can cause, anything from ulcerations, abscesses, bloody diarrhea, and abdominal pain. And the book actually lists several more. I just chose a few in there, just enough to make it disgusting. But prognosis is really poor unless you early detection and get immediate treatment. But heavy infestations, prognosis is poor for these people. I mean, you're going to go into anemia, internal bleeding, and you could die pretty quick from this if you think about it. And then C, lung flukes. You get lung flukes by eating raw crab. And there are some other seafoods that can have this, but the crab was the #1 listing they listed in the book. And it runs the same life cycle as schistosoma. It uses some form of snail, enters the water, and either the fish scale or penetrates through the skin of a mammal. All right, this says class Cystota. On the next one, these are long, flat bodies composed of scolex. Now remember, all these are under phylum Platyhelminthes. So we're looking at different classes and different subclasses under each one of these classes. I don't typically dive in as deep as I do in this chapter because it's the subclasses that's out there killing people. That's why we got to get down to the Digenae and the schistosoma. So class Cystota, long flat bodies composed of a scolex followed by reproductive units called proglottids. These cystodes entirely lack a digestive system. They don't even have a digestive system. That's how much they depend on their host to get the job done. They just sit there and absorb your food. Isn't that nice? The first one listed under class Cystode is the beef tapeworm. The beef tapeworm is the most common one found in humans. And this particular one, you simply get it by eating rare or uncooked beef. So as I put down, cook the moo out of your beef and you won't have that problem. It shouldn't be mooing when you take it off the grill. When you stab it to get it off the grill, it shouldn't go mmm. That's not, put it back on the grill. Now, I like it juicy. I don't like it bloody. That's the difference. You can cook, you eat yours bloody because, yeah, okay. We'll just slice it off the side of the beef and go ahead and chew on it. Now we know who has beef tapeworms in this class, don't we? Reproduction is shedding as many as 2,000 proglottids. Now a gravid proglottid is one that's ripe and ready to reproduce. These break off and pass out the feces. They crawl out the fecal matter into nearby vegetation. There they're eaten by grazing cattle. Embryos may remain viable for 5 months on grass. Once consumed by the cow, they burrow through the intestine to the blood or lymph, make their way to skeletal muscle where they become bladder worms, and they live in the skeletal muscle. So we slice off this steak for Pam Leatherwood back here, and she goes to gnaw on it, and there it is in there. She eats it. Here we go with the cycle. Gets down in the intestine, goes out to the blood or lymph. You know, it reproduces all these proglottids, and cattle pick it up, and here we go. It's just the cycle over and over. So we've got to have people eating raw beef to keep the cycle going, don't we? We've got to have you, Pam. You're necessary. Isn't that the best thing you've heard all day? That you're needed.
I'm needed. It's nice to know.
Then we have the pork tapeworm. And let me tell you, the pork tapeworm is the least of your worries eating raw pork. You don't eat raw pork. I don't care what you think about eating pork. And I love sausage and I like bacon, and I'll eat a pork chop every now and then, and probably would eat more if I had it in the freezer. But I'm not a total pork lover. I'm a breakfast food lover is what. But pork tapeworms, the least you worries. Now to stop them, obviously, don't eat raw pork. There should not be an oink. There shouldn't be any squeal coming out of that when you take it out of the frying pan. But I'm telling you, pigs that'll eat anything, and they will eat anything. People that go out here and hunt these wild pigs, and they kill these big old boars and big old sows, when something stinks that bad, it doesn't help my appetite to eat it. Oh, it's good. You just get past the stink. Skunk would be good if you get past the stink, wouldn't it? I mean, that's the mentality some of them have. Pork that you buy at the store is in such a controlled environment, you'll have very little problem with that pork. It's the pork that lives in an uncontrolled environment. I mean, when you see wild pigs eating dead carcasses of other animals, there's just something wrong about that picture. When they root around in the dirt where all the worms are at, they're going to be wormy. The older they are, the more exposure they've had, and the more worms they could possibly be carrying. Now the young ones, just grind them up in sausage, and whatever worms they had, you just ground it up and you're good, right? As long as you cook it. Cook the pork out of it. I mean, no squeal. But I do worry about some of those 400-pound boars that get butchered out. They're pretty rank. Y'all been involved in some of that? So, cook the pork. I'll put in there, cook the squeal out of your pork. There you go. Basically the same reproductive cycles we saw in the beef tapeworm. Then fish tapeworms, more common in Finland and Great Lakes area. How many of y'all eat raw fish? Do you eat sushi? Yeah. Well, that's a form of raw fish. So now we know who has your fish tapeworm in here, and she's from McAllister over there. I can tell it's bothering her. I think she'll go back to the sushi bar. What do you think? But yeah, eating raw fish, I mean, we've seen that in a couple different things, and eating raw crabs and things like that. Most of the stuff we eat is typically cooked pretty good, don't you think? Except maybe an occasional bleeding steak. That summarizes chapter 14, and it's a good study handout there I gave you to keep that in your notes. And they have some tables, like one table in 305, if you want to look at that table. And this talks about beef tapeworm, pork tapeworm, fish tapeworm, how you get it, where it's most common. So these tables are good little summaries for you. And there's one thing I noted in there. It said look at page, I think, 305 and 306. And it's talking about infected with these tapeworms. With the beef tapeworm, here's the scenario. The beef industry, kind of like the pork industry, is somewhat controlled in that you'd have very few of these problems. And here's kind of the scenario. Considering that about 1% of American cattle are infected, only 1%. Well, the cattle numbers in the United States is probably the lowest they've been since the 40s and 50s, simply because mainly drought more than anything else. So 1% American cattle infected. 20% of all cattle slaughtered are not federally inspected. I can't imagine inspecting all of them, but 20%, if that's all that hadn't been inspected, that's pretty good, if you ask me. And even in the inspected meat, 1/4 of the infections are missed, and that's very easily done. I mean, it takes a lot of time to inspect the carcass to get everything. So it's not surprising that tapeworm infection is fairly common. Infection is easily avoided when meat is thoroughly cooked. And that's not saying when you get done with it, it's like a piece of rubber either. You can thoroughly cook meat and still have some savory juiciness to it. But they say most of it's from eating roast beef, rare roast beef, steaks, and barbecues. What do we eat around here? Steaks and barbecues. We're the center of barbecue America right here. And if we're not across the line, Arkansas is, they'll barbecue anything they can stick on a stick and eat it too. That's what's scary. So there was a page that I used reference to. So From there, we'll move on over to, what's our next chapter, 17? Yes. Chapter 17, and the first one we'll look on 366, page 366. We're just going to hit the high points in this one as well. This one's dealing with basically earthworms, and I'll throw in a leech or two and we're good in this chapter. The main thing I want to point out on this page, 366, is class Polychaeta. You see it there, highlight it, and note the fact that this class is the largest class of annelids. Annelids are segmented worms, that's all they are. An earthworm is a segmented worm. Polychaetes, poly means many. This is the largest class of annelids, and that's your test question on the test. Which one's the largest class of annelids? Polychaetes. All right, from that I want to go straight to the earthworms, which is on 374. Class Oligochaeta. More than 3,000 species of oligochaetes occur in a great variety of sizes and habitats. Earthworms are our most familiar of the oligochaetes. Some are parasitic, but that would be a minute number of that 3,000 species. A few live in marine or brackish water. With few exceptions, oligochaetes bear setae. Setae are like little legs, if you will. They're little projections on each segment. An earthworm has two on each segment, which basically gives them traction in the soil. It gives them a little leg to get traction in the soil. And they can come blunt, curved, needle-like, arranged in bundles, or single, or straight. I mean, they come in a variety of ways. It depends on which oligochaete you're dealing with. So a form and function of earthworms, our earthworms around here is fairly small, 15 to 30 centimeters really maxes ours out. And we think a 30 centimeter earthworm, as long as a ruler, that's a big earthworm around here. But there are some giant tropical earthworms that they say may be as long as 4 meters. How long is 4 meters? Is that a 12 foot long earthworm? If you run across this earthworm, what are you going to do? You're going to do your best to kill it and ask questions later, right? Something that big around here, it ought to have rattlers on it and be biting somebody. Huh? That's a big earthworm, but once you finally get it killed, which it may be a battle, I don't know, this is a big earthworm, and you finally figure out, oh, it's just an earthworm, it's one of those giant tropical earthworms. Around here, we're thinking, how big a trot line can I bait with that big? Because you can catch, if you catch a catfish, if you find a hook big enough for even half of that worm, that's a massive catfish if you catch him, right? So earthworms normally emerge at night in damp, rainy weather, but stay near the surface. Too much water, they'll drown, but they have to have more skin because they're going to breathe by diffusion through their skin. That's the easiest way of breathing for the earthworms. Of course, when the ground gets really, really dry, they burrow themselves down deep and create a mucus surrounding, which prevents them from drying out, waiting for rain so they can go to the top again. They become very inactive in extremely dry weather. Earthworms move by peristaltic movement, which is muscular movement. So in one chapter in this book, they'll refer to it as hydrostatic skeleton because it's just muscles contracting. When muscles contract, their blood moves, everything functions. If they're not doing much, then everything else slows down. On the right-hand side of the page under nutrition, their digestive tract is kind of like a bird. Has a crop, has a gizzard, has an intestine. The crop's for storage, the gizzard's for grinding. I mean, these worms eat dirt, okay? And whatever's in the dirt is what they're living off of. And a lot of dirt has more calcium in it than these earthworms need. And so they have what's called calciferous glands, which extract excess calcium from what they've absorbed and shoves it back into the gut, and they excrete it out the feces. And the feces of the earthworm is the same as what they just ingested. It's dirt. It has a little more moisture to it, that's all there is. And another type of tissue that they have, and I'm pretty darn sure I have a test question over this, and it's called chlorogen tissue, listed there on that same page. This tissue synthesizes glycogen and fat. synthesizes glycogen and fat. You definitely want to know that. Now, when we dissect this earthworm this week, we'll be able to see the aortic arches. We'll be able to see, in fact, this picture on page 375 is a good reference picture for us. And I think there's one in the book that's actually a little more visual as far as exactly what we need. But we'll be able to see the aortic arches, the dorsal ventral blood vessels in most cases, and at least one nerve, seminal receptacles, seminal vesicles, because earthworms are hermaphroditic. And they list several things here as far as circulation. They have a closed system, but some books will call them hearts, but they're aortic arches. All they do is connect the upper blood vessel with the lower blood vessel. That's all they really do. What moves the blood? Their muscle contraction. If they're moving, blood's moving. Same thing with us, if you really think about it. Your blood's moving if you're sitting there still, but it moves a whole lot better if you're up moving around. So muscle contraction is huge. Respiration is simple diffusion, is all it is. Simple diffusion. Now their blood is a colorless amoeboid type cell, and they call it, there is some dissolved respiratory pigment in there, but its primary purpose is not carrying oxygen like ours. Their oxygen diffuses pretty much straight into their tissues. Now it may carry a little bit, but it would be limited. Their excretion over on 376, we're moving up here. We're moving from a flame cell to metanephridia. Well, again, a nephron's what we have in our kidney. We have 1 million per kidney. A nephridia is a miniature nephron, and so they have many of those. Meta means many, and they're lined up along in the segments. We see it in a picture, but we won't be able to see it when we dissect it. Now, as far as the nervous system, earthworms, they can feel. Now, as far as a brain, they have what's called a subpharyngeal and circumpharyngeal ganglia. So they don't even call it a brain. It's like a nerve ending. But if you stick a hook in them, they know it, don't they? So they do have a sense of feel. Now, reproductive and development. Now, like I said earlier, earthworms are hermaphroditic. They use the term monoecious in here. They can reproduce by themselves, but by choice, they'd rather reproduce with another earthworm. In fact, they'd rather exchange. That's the reason they have seminal vesicles and seminal receptacles. They'd rather exchange genetic material with another earthworm. And then, when earthworms reach the sexual maturity age, they produce what's called a clitellum, which is a larger ring toward the head end of this worm. The next page, I think, shows a picture of a couple of earthworms mating, if your eyes can take that. There's a little pornography as we go through this book, unfortunately. But the clitellum is the swollen surrounding part near the head end. We'll see it on the earthworms we dissect. And they exchange between the clitellum and the head end where the seminal vesicles and receptacles are found. And then the earthworms separate, and from the clitellum will produce a lemon-shaped cocoon. They'll put all the reproductive components inside there, so fertilization takes place inside the cocoon, and then they seal it up and they'll bury it. And the little earthworms will hatch out of it, and they'll look just like the parents except no clitellum, and they won't build a clitellum until they reach the age of sexual maturity where they can actually reproduce. Now, slightly unlike the leeches, in the leech's situation, they'll produce a clitellum during the breeding season only, and then it goes away. So a little bit of difference there. So there's your earthworm reproduction and development. If we look at leeches, you think of a leech, boy, wouldn't you like to have a leech that size on your arm? That's a big leech, isn't it? You know, leeches aren't near as bad as we make them out to be. Doctors still prescribe them for medicinal purposes. They do cleanse the blood, if you think about it. I know of one case where a guy got his ear cut off, and they was able to surgically put his ear back on, but was not able to put all the vessels back together where they needed to be. So we had blood coming in the ear and no blood going out of the ear. Imagine what his ear was starting to look like. It'd look a little like Dumbo, I guess, that one ear. So the doctor prescribed leeches. I don't remember, it seemed like it was 2 leeches 3 times a day, I believe was the prescription. And the leeches literally suck down the swelling because they ate the blood, but they also provided this sucking effect that actually over time, about 6 to 8 months, developed another vessel, an exit vessel. And then the anticoagulant they produce kept it flowing in the ear so the blood didn't clot in the ear while it was there. His ear eventually went back to normal. Makes you want to go get some leeches just to keep them around for medicinal purposes. You never know when you might lose a finger or an ear. Huh? Well, one thing you don't want to do is reuse a leech, especially if somebody else has used it first, because they can carry blood-borne illnesses. There you go. There's your tidbit of information for today.
Don't share needles and don't share leeches.
Do what?
I said don't share needles and don't share leeches.
There you go. We ought to make a print out of that. Leeches are hermaphroditic as well, so they like to cross-fertilize with other leeches to get the job done. They can reproduce by themselves if they need to. Under form and function, they'll tell you there that leeches, unlike other annelids, have a set number of segments. With only few exceptions, 34 is your number. Leeches have 34 segments, and that's unique enough. That's got to be a test question, don't you think? 34 segments. On nutrition, you think of leeches being pretty much bloodsuckers, but it's not necessarily true. They are popularly considered parasitic, but many are predaceous. Most freshwater leeches are active predators or scavengers equipped with proboscis that can extend to ingest small invertebrates or to take blood from cold-blooded vertebrates. Some can force their pharynx or proboscis into soft tissue, such as gills of fish. Some terrestrial leeches feed on insect larvae, earthworms, slugs, and they hold an oral sucker while using a strong sucking pharynx to ingest the food. So there's all kinds of variety of feeding among the leeches, but most leeches are fluid feeders, of some way of some sort. Many prefer to feed on tissue fluids and blood pumped from open wounds. Now, it didn't say if they created the wound or not. It just said an open wound. So probably not, being a major open wound. They do have cutting plates, though, where they can cut through if they need to get blood flow. And then their anticoagulant, which I think our lab this week will ask you what it's called. It's called Hirudin, I believe it is, Hirudin. I believe is the anticoagulant. Some parasitic leeches leave their host only during the breeding season, and certain fish parasites are permanently parasitic, depositing their cocoons on their host fish. So there's your leeches. Moist environments must be very moist soil or watery environment, what they're going to live in. Gas exchange is diffusion again. And the nervous system, they say they have 2 brains, but they go on and call them ganglia. So not much different than what's in the earthworm. Reproduction, we just pretty much covered it. Again, a cocoon buried in dampness, whether it be in water or in very damp soil, and the small leeches emerge just like the parents. All fertilization takes place within the cocoon.
Have 34 what?
34 segments.
So would a leech even be attracted to your skin unless you're bleeding?
Oh, yeah. Have anybody ever caught a leech on you? Darren, you not ever caught a leech on you that you know of?
I know.
There may still be a leech on that boy back
I
there.
saw this one boy, right?
Oh, okay. No bluff hole for you? Even as a small child, you didn't get thrown in the bluff hole?
No.
Oh, okay. Maybe I caught all the leeches out there years ago.
Good possibility.
Chapter 18, the world of nematodes. These nematodes are roundworms, just like we're going to be dissecting in lab this week. And they use the term here that I'm going to explain a little bit. It says, without any doubt, nematodes are the most important pseudocoelomate animals in terms of both numbers and their impact on humans. Now, when they say most important, is that a good important or a bad important? both. When they say important, it affects you one way or the other. And I've not seen much that they do for the good. They're parasites. Parasites aren't necessarily good. So most people are only occasionally aware of these parasites, of humans and of their pets. We're not aware of the millions of these worms in the soil, millions, in ocean and fresh water and in plants and all kinds of animals. So they infect nearly all animals and all plants. Well, let's see, they infect most all plants and nearly all animals. But anyway, they infect most everything they come in contact to. On page 388, Phylonematoda roundworms, there's 25,000 species, and they think they've only scratched the surface on identifying and naming. They think there could be upwards of 500,000 species of these things. They live in the sea, fresh water, and the soil from polar regions to tropics, from mountaintops to depths of the sea. Good topsoil may contain billions of nematodes per acre. If that gives you any idea, how do you think you get wormy? Did you ever eat dirt as a kid? As a kid, how many times your kid comes in and grabs that fresh cookie you just baked and never washed their hands? And they've petted the dogs, and they've ate dirt, and the cat came by. There was something on the porch, they didn't know what it was, so they picked it up and threw it. Well, it was poop. You know, and they ate the cookie anyway, right? Of course, we as parents look at it as they're building their immune system. But we know in our heart that they're really wormy little children because they eat dirt. And they'll tell you in here that boys are more likely to be wormy than girls because boys are more likely to eat dirt than girls. Well, there's some common sense applied in this book, isn't there? The nematodes parasitize virtually every type of animal and many plants. I mean, some of the effects that they have is totally devastating. Infestation on crops, domestic animals, humans make this phylum one of the most important of parasitic animal phyla. Anybody ever raise pups? Raise any puppies? And what about 2 weeks and 4 weeks and 6 weeks you're giving them this wormer? You got to give them the wormer. And the wormer kind of upsets your stomach at the same time killing the worms, so they just go poop little worms everywhere. You notice that? This is the worm we're talking about. Mom don't like it, so mama dog cleans up all the dead worms. And what a disgusting thing to have to do, but mamas are sacrificial, as y'all will know if you don't already. Now, free-living nematodes can feed on bacteria, yeast, fungal hyphae, and algae. There are some predatory species that may eat rotifers and small annelids and other nematodes. Many species feed on plant juices from higher plants, which they penetrate, sometimes causing agricultural damage of great proportions, and they're very difficult to deal with if they do get such numbers that they start infesting your plants. Nematodes themselves may be prey for mites, insect larvae, and even nematode-capturing fungi. A lot of these old-timers, in the wintertime, they'll plow their garden up and they'll plant oats in their garden. Have you ever heard of that? Well, oats, for some reason, the roots of oats has some deterrent for nematodes. Nematodes don't like oats. And so if you plant oats in your garden in the wintertime, it deters nematodes, and what it doesn't kill or get rid of, it runs them off or something, because nematodes don't like them. So they don't like to stay in that area. And I think wheat plays a role in that too, being a close cousin to the oats. Virtually every species of vertebrate and many invertebrates serve as hosts for one or more types of these parasitic nematodes. They cause all kinds of discomfort, disease, death, and in domestic animals are a source of great economic loss. So I think they've made their point that these things can cause some serious damage over time. On 391, let's look at the Ascaris lumbricoid. This is the large roundworm of humans, which at one time they thought it was the same worm that pigs had, which now they call the Ascaris sum, and I'm not convinced they're really not the same. They look the same, but they call this one for humans and the Ascaris sum for pigs. The most common nematode parasites found in humans. Recent surveys show 25% prevalence in some areas of southeast United States. So that adds up to about 1.27 billion people are infected worldwide. The large roundworm of pigs is Scarus sum, morphologically close to the Scarus lumbricoid, and they were long considered the same species. Probably not much difference. A female Ascaris may lay 200,000 eggs a day. I told you a while ago these things can reproduce. When we dissect this thing, that's all we'll see inside of it is a reproductive system. And then I'll point out, oh, here's its intestine, and say, oh, okay. That's not what caught your eye, though, I promise you. Shelled juveniles remain viable for many months or even years in soil. So, I mean, we're all guilty. I mean, the first tomato of the year that's hanging low on the vine, and when it rained, it splashed soil upon it. You think I'm going to let the first tomato of the year make it to the house? I ate it right there, dirt and all. I may have even had a little packet of salt in my pocket, expecting it to be ripe that particular day. I took a chance on becoming wormy because I really like tomatoes. That first strawberry of the year, laying on the dirt. It's not going to make it to the house. I'm not slicing a strawberry in 6 places. I'm not telling anybody it even got ripe. Strawberries ripe yet? Most of them not. That one, it wasn't quite ripe, but I ate it anyway. I'm not going to tell them that, but I ate it anyway. But I'm probably wormy. Infection usually occurs when eggs are ingested with uncooked vegetables or when children put soiled fingers or toys in their mouths. Now, the bottom line on several of these chapters we're looking at, especially this one, poor hygiene. That's how you get wormy from these worms, is poor hygiene. Wash your hands. Wash your food. Don't go to the store and graze just off whatever they got across the store. I need to make sure those grapes are good. Well, hello, Mr. Worm. There's no telling what country that worm came from. Unsanitary defecation habits, seed the soil, or drinking water and viable eggs remain long after signs of fecal matter have disappeared. I mean, we're talking it can be even years in some cases. And this is where they tell you infection rates tend to be highest in areas where the waste treatment processes do not control these factors. So, let's just say the host has consumed the eggs or the embryonic eggs of these lumbricoids. The juveniles hatch in the intestine. They burrow through the intestinal wall, out into the blood vessels, and even into the bronchi, where they could end up in the lungs, and heavy infestations can cause some forms of pneumonia. From there, they typically crawl up the bronchial tubes, and you swallow them back down into the intestine. You don't even know you're doing this. Now, there are some worms that they call roving worms, or there's a couple other terms for them, but they have seen those accidentally come out of people's ears and nose and mouth. They're roaming worms, I guess. But they don't follow their pattern, and they get pretty good size. And you see this little worm come out somebody's nose. That would bother me. So, on reaching the pharynx, the juveniles are swallowed, pass through the stomach, finally mature about 2 months after the eggs were ingested. So in 2 months, you're producing really lots of little roundworms. Parasitism by Ascaris is rarely fatal, but death can occur if the intestine gets blocked with heavy infestations or in cases of pneumonia in the lungs. The wandering worms, here's the wandering worms, may occasionally emerge from the anus or throat and may enter the trachea or eustachian tube and middle ears. Infection rates tend to be highest in children, and males tend to be more heavily infected than females because boys eat more dirt than girls. We cannot argue that fact, can we? The 5-second rule has turned to 10 seconds if it's really something I wanted to eat. Hookworms. Hookworms are really pretty devastating in small mammals. Puppies get hookworms, it'll go through the whole batch. They're very infective, and it'll kill them all. It gives them anemia just really fast and kills them. In humans, these hookworms, very, very small, 9 millimeters in length. The females might be 11, so they're really small. But how you get hookworms live in the soil, just like, of course, it's a kind of nematode, but you're walking around barefooted or in these sandals like you got, you get dirt on your feet, and the hookworm buries in between your toes and enters your system, and heavy infestations in humans is the only one that's really going to cause any trouble, and that could cause anemic situations. But it'd have to be a heavy infestation in a small child that's going to cause the problem. But it'll kill small puppies or kittens and things like that. It'll kill them. It'll kill them pretty fast because they can't take anemia very long. And their life cycle runs very similar, same as the scarce, as far as lungs, swallow them back down. 2 months later, they're reproducing. Then the trichina worm. Adult worms burrow into the mucosa of the small intestine where females produce living young. Juveniles penetrate blood vessels and carried throughout the body where they may be found in almost any tissue or body space. Eventually, they penetrate skeletal muscle cells, becoming one of the largest known intracellular parasites. Juveniles causing astonishing redirection of gene expression in their host cell. This is one of the only internal parasites they know of that can actually change gene expression inside of a cell. That's amazing that they can do this. So now the cell is considered a nurse cell to the worm. The cell lives for the worm. So when raw or poorly cooked meat containing encysted juveniles is swallowed, the worms are liberated in the intestine where they mature. Now where do you get this? Hogs. What can be infected? Wide variety of mammals, including humans, hogs, rats, cats, and dogs. Well, unfortunately, there are some societies that may eat rats, cats, and dogs. This society, for the most part, we would eat the hog that would eat the rat, cats, and dogs, right? So cook the squeal out of your pig and move on. Hogs become infected by eating garbage containing pork scraps, juveniles by eating infected rats. In addition to, we know that there are 4 other sibling species in the genus that differ in geographical distribution. So there's all kinds of these, and there's getting to be more of them, and they're becoming more resistant to freezing, and so they're living in more variety of climates. There has been cases of heavy infections causing death. There's 12 cases discovered annually in the U.S. of death because of this worm, trichina worm. Pinworms, one of my favorites. Pinworms tend to, they're very infectious, but they'll tend to infect children more than adults, and if adults get it, we typically get it from the children. How about that? 30% in children, 16% in adults. The female pinworm migrates from the intestine to the anus at night, where it lays its eggs. Well, migrating out to the anus causes a little itchy effect. So while the child's asleep at night, he's scratching his butt. And while scratching his butt, he kind of infects his hands and bedclothes that's all around where he's scratching. And so mom gets infected when she changes the sheets out, see? And now y'all gonna watch for little kids scratching her butt walking up down the street. You think that little kid's wormy. And if it's your own kid, you say, oh my gosh, my kid's wormy. Well, join a whole lot of other people that has wormy kids. You was probably wormy at one time too, if you're not already. So you take your child to the doctor. You know how the doctor tests for pinworms? He takes a piece of Scotch tape and places it over the child's butthole. Peels it off, puts it under a microscope because the Scotch tape will stick to the eggs that the female laid there. If he sees eggs on the Scotch tape, then he'll prescribe the proper deworming medication for the child and every other person in that family household. You're all going to be dewormed. Me, I just accidentally drop a little ivermectin on myself from time to time, and I have no worms. Any questions about pinworms? The last one here is fleroworms. There's a couple different kinds of fleroworms, and this will finish me up today. I think this is the end of it. The first one they talk about is carried by a mosquito, and that would be the female mosquito, correct? We already learned that one. And they get in, heavy infestations get into the lymph system and block the lymph system and causes edema and extremities, like this foot on the next page. See, this is some serious edema. This is not the only place that you'll find this, though. Edema can be found anywhere the lymph system is. So you can find it in legs and arms. You can find it in breast or in the scrotum. Anywhere they settle in, basically, it can happen. But it takes serious infestations, real heavy infestations, multiple bites by mosquitoes to do this. And up to a few years ago, there was no cure for this. Now we do have a regimen of drugs that does seem to do quite a good job of curing this. But once your leg reaches this point, it's hard to get all that back because we've created so much scar tissue and stretching of the skin and things like that. Now, there is another one that's called, let's see, here it is, river blindness caused by the black fly. And it infects more than 37 million people in Africa, Arabia, Central America, and South America. So river blindness carried by another one. Probably the most common type of fleral worm that we hear of day in and day out is dog heartworm. And if you have dogs, you should treat them, especially in this part of the world, for heartworms. Once they get them, it's too late to treat them. You've got to prevent them from getting them. Because once the worms enter the heart, you can kill them, but then it clogs up the heart and kills the dog anyway. So there's a picture of one there on the right-hand page. I believe that finishes up chapter, whatever chapter that was, 18. Gets us ready for 19. We'll start there. What is today? We'll start there Thursday. Let's come here for lecture, and then we'll go up to lab.
Where are we at?
You can turn that off now.